What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review, and today I am talking about the latest offering from Polish death metalers Sphere, Inferno. This also came out on May 9th, this time on Deformething Production, kind of a weird label name, and this is the band's 5th studio full-length overall, and my first time checking this band out, and like I said earlier, they are, in fact, oh, hang on, there we go, I saw something crawl on my lens for a second. It was like something small, but anyway, so this is a Polish death metal band, so this is the third Polish band I have talked about in the last 2 weeks of reviews. Hate, Behemoth, now Sphere. And hell, we got new Vader EP coming out later this year, which is pretty cool. So, but anyway, so I was curious to check this one out considering, you know, it's Polish death metal, and Poland's got an awesome death metal scene. More so blackened death metal, particularly because of the big three of Behemoth, Hate, and Azeroth. But of course, Vader, Decapitated, Lost Soul, and a bunch of other ones. But this is just the latest one that I've heard about. So, just to kind of preface, so all these song titles feel like they're connected in some kind of a story, except for the opening track. The opening track, Invocatio Perditus. Yeah, Invocatio Perditus. I am so terrible, I'm sorry. But anyway, so it starts off with ambience, and then it goes right into a dissonant melody that more so reminds me of a band like Ulcerate. It's dark, but it's haunting. It kind of sets the mood up, and then you get like haunting mellotrons going on in the background, and then it gets a little bit doomy before it unleashes into pure death metal, into a pure death metal onslaught. Triplet chugs and blast beats, sinister tremolo riffs that show up to kind of add a little bit of an extra layer of evil behind this album, and even some like blackened accents a la bands like Hate and Behemoth. But you also even get some like harmonized riffs that come up on this track, and it does get really heavy. And lead work, I will say lead work across the board on this entire album was pretty well executed. Like lots of melody, lots of shred, even a little bit of technical precision comes in on later tracks, including one in particular that I'll talk about later on. But then the rest of the songs are all like a story called Canto, and it's numbered, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but with a different title. But kicking off the Canto concept, we have Limbus, which immediately riffs and blast beats that feel straight up out of the Vader playbook. There's a lot of Vader in a good chunk of this album in terms of like when it gets like really fast and like death thrash fast. It reminds me so much of Vader. Then again, right before I listened to this album, I was actually listening to some Vader, and it made me think of that. But of course, one thing that comes up a couple of times on this album is whenever you get like either an atonal or a dissonant melody, you get a bass groove going along with it at the same time, which I think adds a really cool dynamic to the songwriting on here. And then one of the other big things on here is how melodic it gets here and there at certain points, whether it's almost like triumphant melodies or just downright disgusting, evil melodies. And on Limbus, you get a lot of melodic riffs that show up here, but you do get sinister melodies on top of like a harmonized lead section before it concludes with some triplet chug brutality. And then Canto 2, Luxuria, this one starts off with synths and strings with a choir. Before, this was probably the fastest song of the album, and it was the shortest at like 3.5 minutes. This song felt very much like a more technical Aborted. And there's a good reason for that, because you have guest vocals from Svenko from Aborted, and he just tears it up vocally on here. You get like all of his stylings on this song, and musically it kind of feels like a complimentary song to Aborted, but with perhaps a little more technical execution going on. Canto 3, Gula, You get like atonal riffs at the beginning, but it almost has a bit of a hardcore feel to it in the tempo before it just gets into straight up triplet chug city. More of those like dark tremolos that kind of feel in between black metal and death metal, if anything at all. But you do still get a tiny bit of blackened accents going on here. And then Canto 4, I had this pronounced correctly earlier, now I forgot. Avaricia? Avaricia? I'm just going to go with Avaricia. So this song, it's mostly triplet rhythms for the most part, but you do get them broken up by the standard rhythm and, of course, tremolos and blasts. But it grooves very nicely, which up to this point, groove doesn't really appear on a lot of these songs. It's only here and there on a couple of spots on some tracks where you get like a groove, but it does get into like this big double time stomp a la Bolt Thrower. And then even some of the tremolos that show up here kind of remind me a little bit of like Morbid Angel, maybe even a little Incantation at spots. And then you get into Canto 5, Ira, or Era, ambience and samples before it just goes back into Vader worship with the riffs and how fast it gets, and it's just a visceral onslaught of music in general. And then you even get like a really cool gallop where you get like chugging riffs, but a dissonant melodic progression over top of it, which just adds a little more to the atmosphere. And it even turns pretty melodic towards the end, and then we get into Canto 6, Heres, or Heresis. I don't know how you pronounce that word. But the way this song starts off with like evil dissonance and a bass groove and lots of like cool drum accents, I would say it more or less reminded me of Immolation a little bit. And then the song itself turns into like pretty much almost a blackened death metal song in the vein of more so I would say Hate than anybody else. And it gallops nicely. You do get like a brief thrashy break and even harmonized solos going on here. Canto 7, Violencia, you get, or Violencia, you get tribal grooves, and then it turns thrashy with like eerie riffs, blackened tremolos, blasts. It gets really chunky, little bit of dissonance, but then you skip back to the Vader vibes. And then Canto 8, Fraus, or Fraus, you get atonal melodies and a bass groove to start off, and then the song turns into like a melodic triplet chug, almost in the vein of, I would say, Amon Amarth, like 2000s era Amon Amarth. But you still do get some like really cool tremolo tags, dissonant tags on top of chugs, and the lead here was absolutely fantastic, and the lead was done by the one and only Dallas Toller Wade of Narcotic Wasteland, formerly of Nile. And then even towards the end you get a bass melody, which was pretty cool. And then the closer, Canto 9, Prodito, it starts off with a clean melody, which there's not a lot of clean play on this album. It's really just on this track. And then it evolves into like an atonal doom melody. And this is really where the groove comes in full force for the most part, but it does get back to being a little bit on the thrashier side, again, kind of like Vader. I also like the little bass slides that are going on here. And then you even get like blast beats on top of like melodies that like alternate, almost like as if we're listening to a battle between good and evil, and like the more triumphant melodies equal to good, the more dark melodies make you think evil. But you do get like a really notable melodic riff towards the end before it chugs to conclude this album. Production wise, I thought this was pretty solid production. Like, drum sound kind of remind me a little bit of Decapitated at times. The guitar tone kind of feels like a hybrid of like every Polish death metal band there is out there. It's a pretty good crunchy guitar tone. Musically, they're all over the map, but there's still, I would say, a straight-up death metal album. It's just you do get some little seasonings here and there of, like, blackened death metal, some death thrash, adding a little bit of atonal riffs and dissonance to kind of just say, like, hey, we're not just a straight-up death metal band, we can do other stuff with it. Really, as far as anything to complain about, I really couldn't find much of anything at all to complain about. I would say Perhaps, and the most minor grievance I could have is maybe they could have had some more groove sections to kind of break up the really fast parts, just to kind of make, uh, kind of give you more room to breathe. But other than that, every song was awesome on here. I am going to go ahead and give this a 4.5 out of 5. Man, in 2 weeks we've had some really good stuff coming from Poland in terms of death metal or blackened death metal, whatever. So with this, if you are a fan of bands like Vader, Decapitated, Hate, Behemoth to a degree, and even to a lesser extent Aborted, check this out. This was some pretty killer stuff. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Man, my voice went away. But anyways, let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But until next time, thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.